50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, a now overturned decision that gave women the right to an abortion. Dozens of medical professionals in Omaha are taking aim at a bill introduced last week in the Nebraska legislature.
It's LB 626, which would essentially ban abortion 6 weeks into a pregnancy. Arbella Caracta joins us with those medical professionals and their thoughts on the bill.
LB 626 would ban an abortion in Nebraska once cardiac activity is detected. That's normally around the 6th week of pregnancy. The bill targets doctors and their licenses if they provide an abortion anytime after that, with some exemptions.
The three exemptions are, of course, rape, incest, and the life-saving measures of a mother.
The bill was introduced by State Senator Joni Albright of Thurston. She was joined by several other state senators during her announcement on January 11th. Dr. Katrina Firth, who has her Ph.D. in neuroscience, also spoke.
The people of Nebraska are taking a heroic step in recognizing the science and recognizing that the unborn child is a human who needs protection like you and I.
Unlike Firth, who was a developmental biologist, other medical doctors gathered in opposition. Nearly 50 Nebraska doctors stood behind their professional peers. A common theme emerged. They claim the bill does not cover medical emergencies with the same nuance that happens in practice. Dr. Mary Kenyon gave an example.
When a patient's water breaks prior to fetal viability, this can have devastating neonatal outcomes, and many infants do not make it to viability. Additionally, pregnant women can suffer devastating infections. So I ask you, how close to death do we allow pregnant people to become before we perform a life-saving abortion?
Other doctors expressed how the bill may push out potential OB/GYN doctors from Nebraska, a state that already has a shortage of medical providers in rural areas. One medical student said she's almost at the end of her training, ready to start her career and her life.
Why would I stay in a state that threatens to take that all away from me? All I want to do is my job, providing my patients with the care they deserve.
The conference today comes on as the legislature this session will convene on whether or not to ban abortion after 6 weeks. An effort by Senator Albright failed last year by 2 votes. On your side in Omaha, Bella Caracta, 6 News.